Um, so hello, we are live. I'm Kate Howe. I'm the co-founder of Postcards for Parents.
And I'm John Stewart. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm the clinical director, proudly, for Postcards for Parents.
Yeah, so great to see you again today, John, and this week. And we have an exciting topic, which is conflict. And mainly we're talking about it in terms of conflict in peer-to-peer relationships. Maybe it will dovetail a little bit in terms of sibling relationships. But I personally learned a lot from the message this week because I realized that I'm sort of conflict avoidant, and we'll kind of like muffle a lot of things rather than kind of get into it with somebody. And so I would love to hear from you about like how all of those kind of predispositions that we have form. And I was really happy to know that there are like good ways to do conflict, so I don't need to be so afraid of it going forward.
The conflict I like best are the ones I win, Kate. Okay, that's a good one.
So you are a competitor. So this is what I learned. There's avoiders, like accommodators, competitors, compromisers, and collaborators.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, I think that most of us, if you hopefully have the capacity to operate within all of those, but you probably have one that you lead with, and probably one that comes out more of your kind of underlying psychology. But
yes, so I was going to ask you that. Is it really from kind of our underlying psychology, and how does that interplay with what we might have learned in the family? Or another thing I'm really interested in is how the culture of a family or a school or a team kind of influences this.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think from my perspective, it's absolutely a function of our background. Now, is there such a thing as temperament? Is there such a thing as a brain that's a little more impulsive, a little quicker? That medial frontal cortex has a little more of a tendency to go from thought to action. Yes, there are different kinds of brains. Do we have a brain that may send off the alert, kind of the internal smoke detector a little more readily than another? And then once you go to that, you're kind of you're dealing with things from a lower brain level, or the reptilian brain, which very little good comes from. So you're going to have differences in people from a neurological standpoint and from a cultural standpoint. And I think that their experiences are what's going to inform what they expect, what they're looking for. And what we look for, we will almost always find on some level. So if I have, and it may well be, let's say I've got a brain that's just a little more of a hair trigger, is a little more likely to be aggressively reactive on some level. I'm not saying physically aggressive, but to go towards the conflict. I probably have experienced, because of that part of me, I have probably created that in a number of experiences in my background. And I may not even attribute it to me. I probably don't attribute it to me, unless I have the ability or the wisdom to be able to say, what's the common factor in all these situations that keep playing out? Me. But I think that our experience and what we expect to happen, it hugely dictates kind of how we respond to a situation. If you have somebody who's been hit by someone, and that the two of them are standing there together, they've been kind of, whether it's a parent hitting a child or two adults, when that adult who has been the aggressor in that situation goes to pull their hair back, the other person steps back. And the dilemma is that there is a unconscious process that when we are in the presence of someone who is in a more agitated state, we become activated.
Okay.
And so you have this moment, maybe I'm just pulling my hair back, and then they pull back, and then I go, what's that? What are you doing? And now I've moved into an aggressive stance.
Yeah.
They either pull back further or they come forward. And so, conflict has a way of kind of unfolding in a lot of different ways, and sometimes, or maybe too often, ways that we don't want it to.
Yeah. So that's so interesting. So you're saying almost just these like innate biological things then become, like it's what you see in the world, and then you've kind of created these situations over and over, so it's reinforced, so then you are sort of justified in seeing the world that way.
Yes.
Okay. And would you so that's out of the five kind of models of approaching conflict that I mentioned, that's kind of the competitive one, right?
Well, I mean, I think conflict is essentially self-protective, and it's self-protective of body. It could be self-protective of self-esteem. So I would say yes, that is probably reflective of that. But I think it also could be of the others as well. It might be that my sense of threat, either to my self-esteem or to my position or to my body, elicits from me a response pattern of withdrawal,
right?
Versus going forward. So I think it can kind of play out in all of those. But I think a conflict is almost always, maybe always, elicited by some form of threat to the self, on one of those various levels of the self.
Right. And if we're talking at starting from a young age, say like when kids first start playing with each other on the playground or in preschool or something, describe some of the dynamics that go on then.
Yeah. I mean, I think that some of it goes back. We're a tribal species, and we're a species where there is there's always inherent degree of competition. The fastest, the strongest, the biggest, whatever it is, the smartest, on some basic level are more likely to win over a mate. Or, there are just all these different variables that go back to our evolution, to our
and not only win a mate, but more likely to get more food, more likely to have to be able to sleep in the place that's more protected. I mean, all these really basic things.
All those things. I think that absolutely, not just when getting a mate. I don't know. Well, that's an important one.
Yeah. And one that is still sort of top of mind and still like incredibly relevant in society, whereas maybe you don't think about the spot competing for the spot on the cave floor as being as necessary, although I mean that still plays out in our modern ways as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I think that how conflict plays out on the playground, there are a couple different things that play a role in whether or not a child becomes drawn to conflict. And we've talked about some of them already, but that aside from what their experience has been, they also then internalize. They may look for something, but they also create a story about themselves. Narrative, we sometimes refer to it as a self-narrative. And if I have a self-narrative that says, this is who I am, and I find myself in a situation that kind of elicits some theme from that narrative, I'm much more likely to act on that than if that's not my narrative. And so, one of the things where we as parents have to be careful about is identifying or defining a youngster as this or that, as aggressive or impulsive, or you can't be like that. You're always angry. You're always you're hitting your brother. There are lots of places where we do want to watch what story we are giving a child about themselves, because it will come back as really ingrained as a part of who they are. Or it can.
Is it? Are there ways to talk about it without giving that narrative? Like, can you say like that behavior was,
absolutely
aggressive, or was not how we treat each other? I mean, what kind of language would you use?
Now, you want to be careful about kind of the Queen's language, or that's not how we are here, or because now that youngsters can say, "Yeah, I'm not part of that. I am separate. I am different." Okay. I mean, I think the best way to manage it is to identify the behavior as problematic. It's like, Billy, buddy, I know that's not who you are. you got in a situation there and I don't think you knew what to do with it. And next thing you knew, you found yourself hitting Susie, not who you are, buddy. But, the rule is if you hit somebody, you can't go out to recess the next day. I mean, it's not about taking away some of the natural consequences, but it is being conscious of the fact that you're not wanting to give a child a story that you are reflecting back to them about who they are that's going to actually make the problem worse. And this is a lot in our culture. It happens a lot in schools. It happens a lot on, playgrounds and school buses where the adults managing it they're not conscious of that they need to provide for the child a way of seeing themselves as still a part of the culture, still a good person, still who hasn't figured out yet. Ross Greene, in his work with the explosive child and collaborative problem-solving model, he one of the things he says is that it's so important for adults to know that kids are doing the best they know how. We need to reflect that back to them. Now, their dilemmas is that there's certain skills they don't have yet. But it's not that they're not doing the best they know how. And boy, I'll tell you, that is a very important and powerful thing to remain cognizant of as a parent, teacher, as a therapist.
And so that entails a level of empathy for the kind of the aggressor, which I think is quite hard for adults often, just like emotionally when we see something happening, just like with all the messages that we get in the culture. So, if something happens on the playground and say we're not even talking about self-narrative. So it's just two kids who are like, neither of them has more of an aggressive self-narrative, but they want different rules for the game, or they both want the same ball or whatever. So walk us through some of the steps to kind of intervene in that situation, or,
if you're intervening before it's come to blows, before it's really blown up, well, then, then that's great. Then I think that you can name it, just naming the dynamics. That, oh, guys, we got a choice of kickball or baseball at recess today. That's going to be tough because Billy, I know you love kickball, man, and Susie, I know you love baseball. I don't know how we're going to deal with it because it's just hard. It's just because you're now naming it so that these kids don't get ambushed by their emotions about what their preference might be, and then you can say, how anybody have an idea how we can do this in a way so it feels kind of good or fair? And kids will oftentimes go to things like, well, we can flip a coin, or we'll keep track and you do it one way. Kids will oftentimes, if you get them before they're so engaged that they can't think, let it get too far down the path. And now that smoke alarm has gone off saying, it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair. They're now functioning in their reptilian brain, and all they want is what they want.
Right.
You can catch them before they go to that lower brain response. You can oftentimes, have something work out pretty well. And particularly when you can validate the feelings. Susie, oh, man, girl, I know how much you're so good at baseball. How much you must, just being emotionally present with that. And to not do it would be hard. But so that's one of the thoughts. If you're catching it before it's started to go, name it. Be a little playful. There's nothing that mitigates anxiety, and conflict is coming out of anxiety. It's a form, when Susie thinks she's not going to be able to play baseball and it's going to be kickball again that Billy had yesterday. Susie now starts to feel anxious about being unimportant, invisible, all those kinds of things. And her smoke detector goes off. And so I think that when you can get out front, playfulness, humor can be just a really nice one. But at least name it.
Yep.
Name it to tame it and feel it with them. Help them. This isn't just a decision about what we're going to do. This is a decision that has heavy emotional loading with these two guys.
Yeah.
It does. And when we get that, we deal with it that way and we act like it's important. Well, it's remarkable how much you can avoid some of these things. Not always. Not always.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once it started to roll,
Mm-hmm.
it started and they're at a point where, maybe it hasn't come to blows yet, but they're not doing well. It gets tougher because you're now dealing with sometimes one or sometimes two kids who are kind of in that reptilian brain. And so a lot of words is not going to help. Kids are agitated, do not learn or take direction well through words. Words have to come in and be processed in a way that's not helpful. So your best bet is to have some kind of way that gets ritualized, maybe in your classroom, that if I clap my hands 3 times, everybody just sits down. Trying to create a stop, a way in which to create a stop. Now, will it always work? No, but often will. And once kids are down, once they have sat in their seats or whatever, whatever it is that you've brought a stop to, it's kind of like the referee blowing the whistle, and the referee blows the whistle, we stop. And that's actually a wonderful emotional regulation skill that we teach kids too. It's one of the reasons why sports are helpful for kids. I'm going at it. The whistle blows. Oh, I got to stop. And so it's the practicing of regulating agitated or high level energy to lower level energy. So I think that, once it's starting to roll a little bit, you do what you can to not choose a side, to say, all right, guys, everybody sit down, and I'm going to flip a coin and see. I'll listen to Susie first. Whoever, if it's heads, Susie goes first. If it's tails, Billy goes first. In couples therapy, which I do a lot of, I always start with a deck of cards or a coin, saying, who's going to go first here? Because we're almost always coming in with something to grumble about, and we're trying to help them figure out how to move through that. But so I think that the notion that when you're in that middle position and you're wanting to begin to process this in a way, you got to be very, very careful about doing anything that's going to be experienced as preferential for one or the other. So managing it it takes a certain amount of finesse.
Yeah.
I think taking the attention off of the kids can be also helpful. Anything from, oh my God, look how high that plane is, to, oh man, I hurt my ankle. Just make it up. So that what you're doing is you're just helping them pull back from the intensity. And then once you've got them to a quieter place, then you go back and you do what you were trying to do before it all went south. I mean, and once again, none of this always works. Okay? If the kids are, and you're going to have some kids who are going to just slow down easily, and other kids who aren't, and they're going to take a little more, and you might have to say, Susie, you're doing a really good job of sitting there. Billy, you're going to get it, man. You're just not quite there yet, okay? Just that of expressing belief. Because if you've got an agitated kid and you're, Billy, you need to sit down. It doesn't generally help them.
Oh, I've never done anything like that, of course.
Me neither, Kate. If they're scared enough of you, if you have that really angry dad or granddad or mom face, well, sometimes they will, but that's not generally where you want to go, because what we know is that when kids go into patterns of compliance out of fear, they don't get internalized. So that means that they will do what they're supposed to do when they have the fear of getting caught. When there's when they have a fear, when they have a sense that they're not going to get caught, it's not a part of who they are. So fear as a mechanism for managing behavior is not great in terms of how it promotes learning about how to be socialized and deal with these things. So let's go back now. Let's go to the one where somebody's got a bloody nose and it's now off the rails. I have no answer for that.
No answer.
Well, I do. I mean, I think the only thing you can do in that moment is try to restore safety. That's it. You get between them. You get another adult. You get another kid there. You've got to restore safety, and And that may be, like a dog fight. Sometimes you can end a dog fight with a loud enough yell, Once it's at that point, you may, that's not necessarily the time where you're going to be able to be all chill and so you're probably, you may well have to do something to bring it to a flow.
But if you're, and it's slightly different. I mean, in a classroom than in a family. As a parent, you can presumably, I mean, obviously depending on how old your child is and how big they are, but you can embrace them. You have like physical ways of kind of co-regulating and restoring safety.
Yeah. I mean, it could be that a littler one has just whacked his big brother, and big brother's not happy about it, and the little one shouldn't have done it. But it may be that at that point you're going to distract them, and you're going to manage it and say to the big one, say, "Hey, there's some cookies I just made in the kitchen." And to the little one, you can say, "Look, we got to talk about that for a moment, and then you can go have a cookie too." There has to be some mechanism for restorative justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was going to ask about that because you earlier said, to never take a side, which I understand, and obviously also not to. I understand that as part of like taking a side maybe comes from a narrative that you don't want to form about like.
And I'm saying not to take a side in the situation if you're trying to downregulate what's going on.
Okay.
You never find a place where you go, that was right and that was wrong. Sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it gets maybe easier and trickier in your own home as well, because you as a parent have a history with, you've seen not only has the younger child just whacked his older brother this time, that happened yesterday and 2 days ago, and so, you both have the benefit and the kind of maybe baggage of that history. So how do you still go back to that place of reflecting back, buddy, you don't want to hit your big brother. He makes you a little crazy, but that's not who you are. But you haven't figured out how not to do that yet, but you will. Mm-hmm. You will. And until then, whenever you do it, you're going to have to have this or that, some little consequence. I'm not big on consequences as enhancing teaching much, but sometimes it just feels like, there has to be something or it doesn't make sense. But I don't think it's very helpful. What about if the consequence is like, I'm going to come over and give you a big bear hug every time you do that? I mean, is that like, that's like an opposite, type of thing?
I think that's worth a try. Because what I know is that when you hit your brother, you're not really yourself.
Right.
And so I'm going to come give you a hug because hugs help us become ourselves again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, your big brother. It's hard. It's hard sometimes that he always gets to be the biggest. He always gets to be the first. I get that's hard, but you will learn how to not whack him, and it'll be better when you do, buddy. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think may help is a quick hug here, bud. I'm absolutely good with that.
You knew how to integrate it right away. You mentioned something, but I want to discuss it a little bit more, which is the like listening to everybody's side of the story. Talk more about how that works and how you facilitate that.
I think that one of the most important, our kids, I'll often, you probably heard me say it a number of times, but our kids need to feel loved and respected. Because those are the two things, if we go back to our pillars, feeling lovable is one of our pillars, feeling like we have this evolving set of competencies from our challenges and that being listened to is a part of respect. Having a child have a sense that you're willing to sit down and hear what they say doesn't mean you're absolutely going to agree with it, but it means you are going to give them the opportunity and you're going to try to understand it and you're going to accept what they say as their truth. I think we've talked about, the PACE model for parenting: playful, accepting, curious, and empathic. That acceptance that the child says, well, but he did this, and maybe the big brother didn't do that. In the moment, there is no value in you going and saying, but he didn't do that, because this upset feeling is all kind of right hemispheric limbic system stuff. it's not subject to additional data. The only thing it's subject to is quieting. And once it gets quiet, well, then you can talk about additional data. But early on. So I think you're listening to a child, having them have a sense that you think they make sense, even if in your heart you think it's crazy what they're doing. You put on that, because I mean, it's one of the most common things that I say with really complex kids in difficult situations, or really kids in any situation. I work with a lot of kids with adoption and attachment issue who do some pretty outlandish stuff sometimes. And it's always starting out with a message: you make sense. You did that for a reason. I know you did. You may not know what the reason is, and I may not know what the reason is, but you make sense. That's such an important message to kids, because it says, keep looking. You're going to figure yourself out. You're not this massive, unpredictable, impulses and behaviors. There's something inside you that you're going to figure out. And in many respects, we call that the self. And when kids have a sense that we keep reflecting back, that they kind of make sense, even when they're being, they're setting up a conflict, which are some of the tougher moments, to listen and to say, you make sense, that didn't work well, and it's probably not going to work well, and you're going to figure out how to not do that. I know that, but right now you haven't yet. So
yeah. I mean, I was listening to both my kids' side of the stories has really been one of the best things that I have learned, and that has made the biggest difference. And it works in multiple ways. I mean, it's not, I think I shared the first time that I sort of said, my older daughter was sort of always the one who I felt was being aggressive. And the first time I said, what's your good reason for what you just did? All of a sudden it was like, I still didn't think it wasn't a good reason to I don't even remember what she had just done, but it like totally changed her demeanor in that time. And it like you said, it made her start to think that she made sense, that I believe that she made sense, really it did change the dynamic. And then over time, it's like, I learned how much I didn't know about what was going on, between them. So maybe one of them hits the other, and that's what I see, but I didn't know about the teasing or the taunting or what they were upset about, behind it. So it's really, I mean, and it's also, I'm always, I'm pleasantly surprised by like how much they want to share their perspective and how much they'll wait for the other person to go and then take their turn. And like, even just after that process, it's often,
once kids think of you as somebody who's going to respect them and wants to hear and help them feel felt in that moment, kids can be, because what you've done is you've helped them move back in, away from the emotional turmoil of whatever it was that led to the elevated behavior, and they're now back in a place where they can think and they can feel you and they can take more than one perspective. Moral development with kids, it's complicated. Piaget did just a beautiful job of talking about it. Kids at different stages have different abilities to be able to understand the perspective of others and make judgments. Well, my 4-year-old, if I'm 6, I may not have a very good perspective on the fact that the 4-year-old really doesn't see the world the same way I do. By 8 and 9, they begin to get that. So, all those kinds of variables that you just want to be honoring of.
Yeah. I wanted to just go back to what you said about additional data, because I get that when a kid is heightened, they're not kind of taking in extra information. But what if the information is like, I need that ball because or I hit him because he stole my ice cream, and then what if the information is, he didn't steal your ice cream, honey. I took it away for X, Y, and Z reason. You know what I mean? What if it's not? If it completely changes what they thought.
You did two things there, Kate. One is you gave information, and the other one is you called him honey. And I'm serious that the tenderness, the gentleness with which you responded to the little guy getting all upset is likely to help him take in the data. It's not that the data is never helpful. It's just not where you start.
Mm-hmm.
Start with the acceptance that they're really upset because they need you to co-regulate their emotion down. So now they can take that data in. Now, does that mean that you never, when somebody says, "Oh, he stole my ball," and starts to look upset, and you see his ball sitting right there? I'm not saying you never take it and just hand it to him. I mean, sometimes you do because and that works and that quiets it down. But if it's going in the wrong direction, mm-hmm. you get a kid who's pretty emotionally dysregulated in response to something. The only task at hand in that moment is to help them regulate. And then you can show them. And the helping of regulating is not about the data. It is essentially matching the affect, kind of matching the importance of that moment. Sometimes they refer to it as the vitality of the moment. Probably not a lot of words, but very few words, as a matter of fact, because the right brain, particularly when agitated, does not like words. All it does is piss them off. So not too many words, nonverbals. Oh, that was awful. He took your ball. Yeah, he took my ball. Oh, I hate him. He always takes my ball. Oh man, that must be hard, buddy. I'm sorry. He always takes it. Yeah. Oh, I get it. It makes you frustrated, and he's bigger than you, and all that kind of yeah. And what you see is they begin to quiet down, and then you might be able to go, "But buddy, I think your ball's over there." And you're likely to have a kid who's better able to go there. If he's not, he said, "No, that's not my ball." An agitated kid will not take a piece of data readily and change their thinking.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then they change it.
And also, correct me if I'm wrong, but
you rarely are, Kate. So
that the agitation that they're feeling is sort of like tapping into other agitation. So even if that particular ball, even that data wasn't right in that situation, it's like kind of piggybacking on other stuff that they have going on.
Once you go into the well of despair, there's all this stuff that comes up and it gets mingled in together. Absolutely.
Okay. I love the idea about the rituals, like, the whistle in sports or clapping your hands in the classroom.
Teachers turn off the lights. That's one of the most common ones for elementary teachers or high school teachers. I've seen them do it. You just turn off the lights. And basically everybody knows and get quiet.
Mm-hmm. So two questions. Just, the first one is, do you have any like other ideas for at home where those are kind of like classroom oriented, but also like the idea of talking about conflict in a cool moment and maybe deciding together how you want to approach it, so that like giving them a pre-roadmap, is that something that works? No,
absolutely. Anticipatory guidance really helps kids. It helps them use whatever tools they've got, whatever tools you want to provide them. So I think that and at home, it could be in a good moment. You guys are sitting, you're kind of having fun, and you say, "Hey guys, I noticed that at dinner, who gets to sit in that seat almost always becomes kind of awful, doesn't it? Just awful." I think we should all just sit on the floor. The more you can use, and this is easier for some than others, but more you can use silliness or playfulness in those moments. Sometimes you can't use them in the moment when things are ramped up, because sometimes that'll just agitate kids. But in a moment like that, and say, "Look, I got a plan for us," or what should we call that problem between the two of you? Because sometimes it's because one of you comes downstairs. This sort of situation you probably would have figured out by saying, Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays is yours and the other. But even that never really works. At least because one of them wasn't there the day before. Does that mean I get so you got to have those rules really locked down, because kids can be like young attorneys and do that. But let's say you're going to come up with a name for that moment, and then a plan. Talk about what we can do in that moment. It's the chair war or something like that. What do we do when the chair war starts? Just getting them to think about it in the abstract with a little distance on it. Well, one of them might say, well, we wouldn't have the chair war if Billy didn't always take the chair when it was my turn or whatever. And you say, okay, all right, I get it. And I bet if I asked Susie, she'd probably have something. Yeah, I do. Billy, Billy's always saying, so you go, oh, wait a minute. Oh man, it really, chairs. I don't even know if we could have chairs in this house because people fight, and just stay with them a little bit and see if you can come up with something that feels like once you name it, it's this chair war. And it means that maybe the rule is that whoever gets the chair, the other one gets an extra cookie at dessert or an extra, or whoever, and then they both may not want the chair. So it isn't that there's any fundamental right way to do it, but it's keeping it light, naming it, and then coming up with something that is relatively coherent, that might help in that moment, and then just know that whatever you do, don't have all your eggs in that basket. Because there is no strategy that always works, because sometimes our kids come into an interaction in a place where they're not able to use it. And those are moments where we have to recognize something going on with Susie, and then we give her a little more attention at a later point. There's a tenet in development that says kids seek the attention they need. And another one, that if they can't get good attention, positive attention, they'll go for negative attention. And so the more we understand that, generally speaking, the better able we are to manage it. But people oftentimes get concerned that, our kids are going to, they're going to get coddled, and then we're going to get them in a bad pattern of giving them attention when they don't need it. It doesn't mean that we never challenge our kids, because we do. We need to. And, if my youngster doesn't want to ride her two-wheeler, and she's ready to do it, and she's done it, but today, for whatever, she's scared to do it. It doesn't mean that you might not challenge her or try to have some fun with her to get her to try it, or you don't want to humiliate her. You might bribe her. I'm completely comfortable with those kinds of things in the moment. You do this. You ride this 100 yards with me, and we'll get an ice cream. I don't have an issue. I don't want kids to say to parents, will you give me an ice cream if I do that? You don't want to get into that pattern, because you then you've changed the power differential. The parent can say it, and that's fine. Otherwise, the child is kind of taking the parent hostage.
Right. Interesting.
And that's not okay. That's not. So, I think that, kids need to be challenged, and that's fine. But I the amount of attention that they need in a given situation, I wouldn't generally worry too much about giving them too much attention, because they generally do. They are letting you know what they need, and then you pull back. Yeah,
that's interesting, because I do just see that all around in parenting, sort of like, just this like, stop needing attention, and I'm going to stop giving it to you so that you will learn to stop needing it. And I understand that, but I also have experience from kind of like trying to give more attention, that they do, when they don't want it anymore, like they'll run off and play. They're not going to bother you forever.
Robert White was the guy who talked about the drive for competency. Kids they have a drive to do it on their own. Just watch sometimes. And so when they're not able to do that, then you figure it out. Now, are there some kids who have fallen into a pattern of demanding too much support in given situations? Yes. And then those have to be dealt with in a very delicate way. You need to name it. You need to work with them. You need to give them some kind of transitional tools to manage some of that. You may need to put them with the parent that they're least likely to go to. If they have a hard time getting out of the car to go into the classroom with mom, then for a little while, dad takes the kids to school, because maybe easier for them to separate with dad. So you don't make a big deal out of that. You don't say, well, because you can't get out with mom, we're now going to send dad. You just go, oh, dad's schedule's changed. Dad's going to be taking you for a little while. Because if it's put into place as if it's to solve some problem that the child's created, you also are communicating some shame.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So did we completely close the book on conflict? Was there any other?
I don't think so. I think that it's a given. I think that one of the things you and I have talked about a little bit before is parents who have a very limited tolerance for aggression. That conflict that gets expressed in aggression and get really anxious when it happens. That's problematic because it conveys a couple different things. One, it conveys a lack of belief that the child is going to be able to monitor their own aggressive impulses. And that lack of belief that they're going to do it actually becomes part of their story and it makes it more likely to happen. So I think that there are certain situations around conflict where we have to be very careful and kind of know pretty well our own demons, our own things, and try to figure out when something's pretty normative and maybe even fake it that we're okay with it.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad that you brought that up because when we were talking about the kind of anticipatory guidance, you call it. So talking about conflicts with your kids. I mean, I feel like part of what that does is so that when that happens, they're not like completely agitated. It's sort of like, oh, the world is following the pattern that we talked about. And so the anxiety goes down, right? Because even though it's a conflict, like we're not surprised. We know we can deal with it. And I think the same thing for parents is actually probably very helpful because I don't know like how we have this mass amnesia about how we grew up, but I feel like once parents are at a certain age, they sort of think that everybody should get along and everybody should know how to get along without being taught or without kind of having scuff-ups, which as you said,
and if they mean I'm a bad parent or I'm creating a bad family environment here, and then parents get more.
Or they're going to be doing at 26 what they're doing at 6,
Yeah.
That's a big one. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like it would be really helpful for parents also to just like really feel when they do see their kids having a conflict, whether it's with a sibling or a friend or whatever, like what is it that the parent feels? Because I've been in situations where my daughter was kind of, maybe like negotiating with a friend were they going to take home something of the other person's, and this particular time that I'm thinking about, the other mother's like, well, I guess you guys can just figure it out. And I was like, is that okay? Should they or should they not? I mean, I think that's also another question is like, how much do you let kids just work it out on their own versus how much do you intervene? But the point that I was trying to bring up is just like, awareness of one's own big feelings that come up and just kind of like maybe having more tolerance, or at least if you have a roadmap in place, then you don't need to be so anxious about it.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I think that if you're fortunate enough to have two parents, you'll often have one parent who has a different reaction to some of these things, and you can help each other. I mean, that's the value of having two parents is Sometimes we can help the other one come off the edge and then deal with the child in a way that's more modulated and really more in line with what they need.
Yeah. But let me ask you something. So if after kids do have a conflict, do they, and I understand that if it's been managed very well and everybody's gotten to say their feelings and everybody's like, maybe they've come up with a great cooperative solution and then
circle.
Right. So then there's no harm done. But say, it's been a little more contentious or there has been a scuffle or it doesn't feel all resolved. Like, is that just kind of okay? Like that happens and everybody,
It has to be okay. I mean, then you go back and you look at it and you feel and you learn from it and you try not to create shame because shame does not work well in converting behavioral patterns with kids. So I think that you go back to it at a later point and you kind of process it. You go, there was a term used a lot in the 60s and 70s called a life space interview. And it means that after something's not gone well, you go back in a non-judgmental way and just talk about it. Well, what happened? What was the stuff going on? Just help the child talk it through without any special intent on your part to teach a lesson. The lesson is in what happened. That's the powerful lesson. So I think that's, you go back and you go,
okay, so that's what?
Your eye looks pretty sore.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so that's processing it after. What happens if the conflicts aren't processed for kids?
I think that I think they're more likely to stay as kind of a disorganized aspect of a narrative. It's just kind of, I see myself doing this is I don't make sense, or people don't think I make sense, or I'm an aggressive kid. I think it's unprocessed. Now, if they're just little moments, you don't have to process everything, but more significant moments, if they're not processed, the saying in my parents' generation was less said, sooner forgotten. Well, let's say that doesn't work all that well. There's not a lot of psychology that says that in the long term that's not great. But by the same token, you don't want to make an enormous deal out of it, because then you bring all this angst and concern. So you figure out how to create it into a little fundamentally hopeful narrative that says, that doesn't look good. Your eye looks sore, buddy. And Billy hit you with his truck, huh? Yeah. Well, what happened? Well, he took my thing, and so I hit him first, and he just said, oh man, that didn't go well at all. Just kind of work through it. There isn't any. We are highly prone to try to kind of teach and moralize around some of this stuff, and more often than not, it's not particularly helpful. It doesn't mean you never say to a child, well, how do you think it would make you feel if he did that to you? I'm not saying you never do that. But things like empathy are caught. They're not taught. And that a lot of the kind of language-based instruction it makes us feel better as adults, but it's really not the way kids, for the most part, learn.
So it's really feeling where they came from and making space for them to talk about that.
And creating a little story that's coherent and makes sense. They're not this horrible person in it. It didn't go well. They don't necessarily want to repeat it, but that's how it is.
Great. And so do you see, like, once kids have been kind of coached through these steps a couple of times, that then they kind of take it on themselves?
Some more than others, and some depending on how many places they're having that kind of experience. If they're having that experience just when Mr. Jones is on the playground and when Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Peters are there most days, they don't have that experience. So, I think it's the benefit of it is tied to the degree of exposure they have. Exposure in the home being the most important one. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's why we're here. I think that was. I think those are most of my questions.
Okay. You're always fun to talk to. You really are. You're honest, and you're right in the middle of being a mom, and you're thoughtful, and this stuff. So it's always fun to talk to you about it.
Yeah, likewise. And I learned a lot today, so I appreciate it.
I'll see you in a week or so.
Sounds great. We'll see you next Wednesday. All right. Bye-bye.